Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Conversations with Coaches podcast. I'm your host, Kevin. I have already stole a beautiful productivity tip from my guest today that I'm really excited to try, which I guess makes me a nerd of some variety, which I'm very proud of. I have the pleasure of hosting MaryJo Burchard. Emphasis on the second syllable, right? Burchard. Okay, good. I put it all in caps so I could remember. MaryJo is an executive coach, consultant, and speaker who helps leaders and organizations thrive in times of major disruption and radical change. This has led to a focus on trauma-informed leadership, which is a phrase I really, really love. Trust, belonging, and change readiness, another phrase I really love. Her Ph.D. in organizational leadership enables her to be both data-driven and empathetic in her approach. MaryJo, the total package, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Let's start at the place I love to start, the little superhero origin story of your identity, your being as a coach. How did you realize, discover, decide to call yourself? Who told you that you maybe already were a coach? And whatever that realization point was, or however it arrived, where did it go from there into the practice, the coaching business you have today?
Such a good question. So my original background is in higher ed, and I was doing leadership studies. And so I was training people. Most of them were already leaders with positions in different organizations in how to understand what it was that they were supposed to be doing. But kind of like how everyone has a diet, but not everyone is mindful of their diet. Because nobody goes to the grocery store and says, I'm starting from scratch today. No, like my son says, go buy the weekly things. You know, we all have our things. So leaders have their way of doing things. And so just like that, you know, we can learn things that we should do, the way that we should eat, the way that we should sleep, the way that we should live, the way that we should lead. And we can know those things in our heads, but that's not enough to own it. And it doesn't become sustainable transformation in the person's life until they're ready to own it. And when it was framed to me at one point that teaching is showing and telling the what and the how, but coaching is asking what and how. And for me, I was like, oh, that's it. Because when we ask how and what questions, and people answer us, not only are we helping them to connect the dots, but they also have to take ownership of that answer and the solution that we're kind of co-creating, but we're throwing them the ball. And so that was the transition for me. I felt like that was in order to help leaders become truly sustainable and really not just know the right things to do, but for that to become the lens that they lay over the way that they think and interact with the world. I needed to also coach.
I love that analogy you just used, the lens that you lay over the world, is one I love to think about, because again, it's like you don't have to create vision. And this is something that coaches identify too. You don't bring necessarily something that the person who's asking for your coaching doesn't have already. What you're doing is allowing them to discover and develop and be intentional about what they're doing and the way they're doing it, and providing them lenses that do very little to actually change the world around them, but lets them see it in a whole new way that allows things to come into focus, to just extend the analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I love the process so much. It's so, I do love the compare and contrast between teaching and coaching, because that's something that I know a lot of coaches will bump into still, even though coaching's been on a real rising tide for quite some time now. It's like, what's the distinction about coaching versus like something like mentorship or consulting or teaching? Consulting is a lot of one where there's a lot of compare and contrast, because, you know, there's alliteration there, coaching and consulting. A lot of coaches are consultants, a lot of consultants are coaches. And so that distinction between sort of showing versus guiding, you know, and like providing answers versus asking questions.
Yes.
It's a subtle but very profound pivot. And I feel like it's a good way to demonstrate the distinction of what a coach really has to offer.
And I think, you know, as is true for many things, a good educator will incorporate coaching or even incorporate consulting, or in my field at least, you know, but when you understand what the distinctions are, you can be more mindful of switching hats and more strategic in when you put them on and take them off in specific contexts. So in the higher ed context, I may be coaching somebody to own, whether it is owning an element or a dynamic or a characteristic of leadership that they need to really adopt in order to be successful, or it could be an assignment, own their responsibility on what they did on assignment. At the same time, I may need to, as I'm coaching an organization, they may be uninformed about the impact of certain things, and they may need someone to come in and give some training and do some research and do some things to help connect those dots so that they have a kind of customized prescription lens for that framework. Then we can, from that, use that to build, the coaching conversations.
I love that. It's also something I find to be near universal amongst coaches, is that commitment to working from the foundations up, so to speak, where it's like they identify, like come in and like very, very agile, very adaptive. Obviously, most coaches have specialties and they bring like a sort of unique set of skills and experiences and approach compared to maybe other coaches, even though there are certain common principles that pretty much all coaches have in common. And there's that commitment to coming in and not just applying your coaching as just like a blanket or a paste on top of whatever you're coming into. There's a real seeking and curiosity for not just that the fit be right, because the fit has to be right before there really any work can be done, but also looking around for what's the foundational place for us to start, what's needed before the next thing can come, what questions have to be asked before the next better questions get to be asked and answered. And so and I find that curiosity, that hunger for those foundational moments of beginning really does separate what a coach does compared to pretty much anybody else who comes in and tries to help, anybody who's coming in trying to serve. And that's why I feel like coaching has gotten such traction amongst not just in business, where it's become elevated to like being not just something that, people slip in as a line item on their annual budgets, but they actually invest in, the capital I invest in. And I love seeing that growth on the professional scale and also on the personal scale. People are understanding that they want to invest in themselves. I'm sorry, I'm talking more than you now, but
no, it's okay.
There was a really good analogy that I love, that's been on my mind this week in particular, in the way that if you go back just a few decades, gym memberships are relatively new concepts where you invest in like some sort of program, you have personal trainer or whatever it happens to be, because you decided to take something about your fitness seriously. Maybe you invest in like learning about like diet and exercise, whatever it happens to be. But like just the idea of like a gym membership where it's just like you pay an organization on a regular basis so that you have access to the tools and the training and the coaching that you want and need, because you have to invest in your physical health to live the life you want to live, to go where you want to go. And I'm feeling in a similar way, kind of parallel tracks, I'm feeling like that's a direction that coaching is definitely going. I got just well on its way there, because there's just a commitment, a realization that, I need to start putting my money where my mouth is. I need to start putting my time where my mouth is, where my intentions are. And I just love seeing people who have no real understanding or come from a place of zero, like not real understanding of what coaches do, who they are, and then start asking themselves questions about the lives they want to live, where they want their businesses to go, their careers, their personal lives. And they're like, you know what the answer is? I think I need a coach.
I look at a good coach can help people figure out what questions they're not asking themselves, so that a good coach, and this is something that I think good coaches have in common with good therapists. Therapists are helping people look back and frame it appropriately so that they can let it become what they need to become through it. But a coach is saying, from here, where is here and where are we going? And helping people to ask the unasked questions and own the answers. And so a good coach, a good therapist, a good doctor, medical doctor, they're working their way out of a job. Because we should be helping people to learn how to think differently and become a healthy voice in their head that helps them to steer. It's like another rudder. The questions determine the trajectory, So at some point, they may need someone else to start asking them questions from a perspective that that's not you were talking about niche, it's not the questions that they've outgrown what I can do for them. And so my goal is to really help people to take them as far and as high and as deep as they're able to go with me, until that becomes really part of their way of thinking and living and acting. And then whatever happens from there, either they can do it on their own, or they can find someone that can say what else needs to be asked,
Yeah. What else? What next?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tear myself away from this leg of the conversation, because I warned you, there are so many different like jumping off points here where it's just so rich and so meaty, and I could do this for hours. But I want to, kind of in line with your answer just now, bring things up to the present and look to the future, and talk about like what your coaching practice looks like today. And I've been kind of like workshopping and how to ask this question to really get at the heart of it, so you can jump off and answer it however you like. And what I've landed on that I'm really liking a lot is, it's almost like an interrogation question. Who do you coach and how do you coach them? What did you know and when did you know it? So the who obviously is like who you focus on, like who you primarily work with. And then the how is the one-to-one group coaching, masterminds, keynote speeches, courses, and all of the above. So the who and the how, what's it like these days?
I would say that the common thread between all of the people that I coach is that they are leaders at some level, but where they're coming from is a very broad spectrum. So I work with people in higher ed. I work with people in nonprofits, in corporations, in government organizations. But the big common thread, besides being leaders, is that there's probably some big, hairy, unexpected, unwanted, unplanned thing that they're facing that they want to, there's this perspective for a lot of people that, there's the squishy, nice person way to do things that doesn't get anything done, but makes people feel good. And then there's this serious hard charger who gets the outputs, But I truly believe that in the midst of the hurricane, in the midst of the storm, that is when people need to be seen and heard and valued more than any other moment. And so if you can help a leader get clarity on how to engage in a way that conveys belonging to the people and says, we don't have any choice. This is not something that we can vote on. This came to like COVID. Everyone would have voted no, except for Zoom, maybe, on COVID. There's a few, people who made off like kings, but the rest of us would not have voted yes for that. We don't get to vote on whether a hurricane comes, where it's going to land, who it's going to impact or for how long. But we can, before, during, and after that storm, we can do the hard things as humanely and constructively as possible. And so I find that my calling is to airdrop into whatever that messy storm is and help people to remember that they're first people, and second, that there are non-negotiables that have to get done. So how can we do the hard things in the most humane possible way? And that's kind of my niche.
I like that. I like that phrase. That's quite a niche. And also, once again, you've nailed the analogy, because the image of you airdropping into a climate emergency, a weather emergency, something like that. And it's like, okay. And that's, think of you almost as doing like the triage work, where you're just like, okay, what needs the attention right now?
Right.
Let's
so that
care for the people that need it.
Exactly. And so because it depends on the nature of, we can say crisis. Sometimes it's not a crisis. Sometimes it's a really good change. It's just a really big, unexpected one.
Exactly.
But sometimes people need training. Sometimes people need coaching. Sometimes people need a keynote. Sometimes people need all different things. So a big part of what I do is, when I get there, is assess the true state of things. And that's where that research really comes in handy. And then giving people a shared language and a framework to work from, so that they can identify the triage, the biggest needs that need to be addressed in order for everybody to stay afloat. Sometimes, believe it or not, when people are coming out of trauma, the biggest thing that they need is process improvement coaching. Because think about this, in the average organization, before some big crazy thing happens, everybody is defaulting through life, right? And so there are janky elements to whatever it is that they're doing, whether it's a program that they're using or a process. And so what do people do? They make up the difference. They figure out how to make it work. They, MacGyver it. But all that is in their heads. And they come to work and so they're doing the process, but they're also being the process, an element of the process that nobody else knows is there because it's in them. They just come and they do it. And then when some big devastation happens, whether it is, I volunteer to do work with Ukrainian people that are counseling Ukrainian refugees. So whether it's something like that, or it's a mass shooting or a restructure, when those things happen and it's unexpected and people are knocked off their feet, there's so much noise that's happening that they could do something on autopilot, but they can't both be and do the process. And so process improvement is saying, okay, where are all the invisible things? Where are all the holes that are not documented? Let's get them shared so that nobody has to think and you can do. So some of it is trauma informed in the sense of where's the noise and how can we minimize it, and other things other times it's more socio-emotional.
Yeah, I love that approach because, I'm probably thinking or empathizing a little too closely and feeling a little too personally about it, but there's those times, and you'll realize this in your own personal life, but you'll see this in organizations a lot as well, where too much weight has been allowed to rest on a strong support, but not a support that was meant to carry that much weight.
Right.
And it's the kind of thing that accrues over time where you're like, where it hasn't been examined in too long, and you're like, when's the last time I looked at this thing that I just take for granted that's my responsibility? And it's like, so is it? How is this something that can just be through process development? Can the weight be more evenly distributed? Can I not be the single point of failure? So what if using a very recent example, what if I catch COVID and I'm out for 1 week? What if I get the long one and I have brain fog for a month? What happens to all the things that only I'm doing? Does anybody else know how to do them? Does anybody else even know that I do them in the first place? And so that's why coming in and looking around for that. And again, I love that the hurricane is a great analogy, even though hurricanes are largely looked at as negative, but it can be applied like a hurricane of positivity, like a great, big, awesome change that's going to benefit everybody eventually. It's still going to create a lot of chaos and maybe create a lot of mess. It's going to maybe get some people really hurt professionally, emotionally, or worse. And so coming in and just being like, okay, where can I help? Where are I don't want to call them weak points, but where are the points where this is all on one person, or this is all on one process, or where is the unexamined supports?
Exactly. So it's like putting in things like identifying where the feedback loops need to be and where the torch needs to be passed, or things like that. It can be those technical things, or it could be more socio-emotional, but so yeah.
I just looked at the clock and I'm like, oh my goodness. We're already, we're not past time, because I like to put a little padding on either side, but I warned you I would get really into this. And I'm like, if I'm looking at myself in the Zoom window and I'm I see myself, I'm leaning in, and I'm kind of almost on the balls of my feet, shifting my weight. I'm loving this conversation, but I'm going to cut it, not short, I'm going to cut it at the right length and ask you, where can people learn more about you, what you do, how you do it, just more about everything that you're doing? And also, where do you like to connect with people online to start new relationships? Where do you like people to reach out to you, like a preferred social media or just a place on your website? So where can people find you and find out more?
So I'm on LinkedIn, MaryJo Burchard. That's easy. And that's actually how we met. My website is concordleader.com. And my email address is real easy. It's dr.burchard@concordleader.com. So people can reach me there.
Lovely. I believe you have your email address, and I think you have a phone number on your LinkedIn profile. I was looking at your about page. So it's you are very contactable, which is excellent.
We try. When you're dealing with people that have stuff on fire, you kind of need to be contactable.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a 24/7 on-call element to it. Well, thank you for breaking off a little bit of time today. I've really, really, really enjoyed talking with you. I find myself saying this more and more lately, I feel like, but you're no exception to the rule of I want to have you back on for a part 2.
Oh, that would be fantastic. I would love
just to focus on one thing. I love talking to you, and I love what you're doing. I love your focus on leadership, but the broad spectrum under which you operate. I really love that approach, because it can be very difficult to be that agile and adaptable to different kinds of situations, and specializing in adaptability. I know that sounds almost like an oxymoron. I personally find that to be very, very, very valuable in the world in general, and in business in particular, in a way that people are realizing more. So thanks for doing what you do, I guess, is my point.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It was great to meet you and actually have this fun conversation.
Yeah. And to those of you listening, I mean, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. For fraction, find out more about MaryJo. You know where to find her. She's great. Have a conversation with her. I promise you won't be sorry. And you probably need a little bit of what she has to offer. I'll just put that out there, but I'll let you decide that for yourselves. And we'll talk to you again very soon.